Today we're discussing a show based loosely off Mary Shelley's 1818 novel published New Year's 205 years ago, Frankenstein. The name of the show is Creature or Yaratilan if you prefer the Turkish title. It was released on Netflix in late October. The pilot is titled Heal Him. Welcome to today's episode. Now, having never read Frankenstein, I do know one thing, that the name of the monster was actually Creature, right?
Yeah, well, yeah. And
it was referred to as Creature.
Yes.
So the title is actually more accurate here than if it had been called like The Monster or The Munsters or something like that.
But you never read it?
No, I never read it.
I had to do a book report for it back in 8th grade, and then I also had to do War of the Worlds, and those were the two books I only read.
So you stuck to like sci-fi, old type sci-fi classic novels.
Classics, yes.
And then what did you think of it?
I actually liked Frankenstein. The teacher pulled me over and said, look, this story might be a little dry. You might want to choose something else. But reading it, I found it pretty interesting.
Don't you love it when a teacher tells you straight up as a kid and they're like, yeah, this is kind of a boring book. Here you go.
Maybe that was the reason why I liked it so much. I was going into it expecting to really just get this dry read. But actually...
Is it short?
No, I think it's like 200 to 300 pages if I remember correctly.
Okay.
I also might have had it updated.
Pacing good?
Pacing I thought was good. Yeah, it was a little slow. But once you actually learn more about the monster, you start to feel bad for it. In fact, I think that's really the main thing about Frankenstein that so many people like. It's really kind of a like explanation on like humanity and how we treat things that we don't really understand.
I do remember that you went to go see those like movies that came out several years ago, like a decade ago actually.
Yes, so in 2013, I went to go see a play that was filmed in 2011 starring Johnny Lee Miller and Benedict Cumberbatch, like a Sherlockian Frankenstein.
Wait, did you just call him Cumberpatch? Like Sour Patch Kid?
No, I meant Benedict Cumberbatch. It was actually directed by Danny Boyle, who did Trainspotting and Slumdog Millionaire. So that's where the Johnny Lee Miller connection comes in.
And it wasn't a direct translation. I would assume it was more.
No, it was a play where depending on which night you went to go see it, the two characters, both the actors would switch roles. So one would play Victor Frankenstein and one would play the monster.
Frankenstein's monster.
The night that I saw it was Benedict Cumberbatch playing the monster. Because I liked seeing that because I thought that Benedict Cumberbatch kind of always played the scientist role, so I was glad to see him in something different.
If you were to consolidate the plot in like less than 2 sentences, other than just stating this is about a crazy scientist who decides to resurrect a dead body, what else goes on?
What else goes on? I mean...
Why are you feeling bad for the monster throughout the story?
Because you see how people treat him. In fact, there's a very famous part in the book where he starts to live with a blind man, and the blind man starts to treat him very nicely because he's not able to see.
I would assume not just starts to, but just does in general.
And then his family comes to visit him, and then they see the monster, and they're like, "Oh my God, this guy's crazy. He's disgusting."
So is the book mostly about just from the point of the view of the monster, or does the doctor take up any time whatsoever? Do they do flashbacks of how he became that doctor?
I don't think that they do backflashes, but he is getting married through the book.
From what I've seen just in television and movies of the past, I've always thought of Dr. Frankenstein as like a middle-aged dude. I was surprised to find out that he was actually like at oldest in his late 30s in the books.
Yes.
And his motive has always seemed sort of deranged. He was blinded by his desire for knowledge. He had this ambition to conquer nature.
Well, you have to remember, this book was made back in 1818. So late 30s isn't what we think of late 30s as now. And it was actually,
I think it was made a couple of years before that. Like Mary Shelley, made it when she was 18 years old.
She made it when she was 18. She finished it when she was 19. I think it was published when she was 21.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, okay. Good for her. Point is, the Dr. Frankenstein that we see in the books or in my mental image of what that is not the one that we get in this series here. In fact, obviously, they're not named Frankenstein. They all have Turkish names, which got a little... you have to get used to that. I did not watch the dubbed version of this, and I don't recommend anybody ever watches the dubbed version of a foreign Netflix production. I remember I started Dark, and those voices alone just got me immediately to turn over to the German.
I think the most infamous, worst dubbed voices is Squid Game. So yes, you watched what the people were actually
really
saying.
Did you watch it in Squid Game?
No, but it became a meme at how bad that dubbed version was.
I have no problem with people making money doing dubbed adaptations if that's the only way that if you don't know how to read. I guess that's what you're stuck with. But like, yeah, the original voices work fine. You just have to spend the time turning on those subtitles. And let's get into this 35-minute pilot called Heal Him. And what do you know about it? Anything?
Not that much. No.
All right, so let me tell you about it. Zia, that's the main character. It's his quest to procure the Book of Resurrection. Now, recently I've seen Evil Dead Rise, and that has the Book of the Dead. And so I could not help but make that comparison when this guy was constantly trying to search for this. But at the same time, the pacing on this, it gets a lot done in the first episode. It doesn't feel rushed, but it was able to hold my attention. What we witness here is the doctor, he's having a fever dream. So I'll describe the intro scene in a second, but throughout the episode, we're getting his memories. It's not just happening in time.
Yes.
If that makes sense. So his memories guide the episode. It's like Slumdog Millionaire or Oppenheimer, where it's only his intense experiences from his past which we're seeing. We see him grow up with his first love, a CA. She's kind of raised as a stepchild because her mom died, and so the family adopts her. We see him learning from his father, who is a village doctor, a very respected village doctor. He amputates a man's leg, so obviously that's a visceral memory for him. He visits a leper colony. We see him living through a cholera outbreak that leads to his mother's death. And then we see him moving to Istanbul as a young man to get his education, but also, by this point, to try to retrieve the Book of Resurrection, but only to get swindled and duped and robbed in his first day there, lose all his money, and he has to break into the school where he sees sort of a madman dancing with a skeleton, and that's the guy.
Like an actual skeleton, or one of those things?
Well, it's a medical hospital, so he's like, that guy is also broken in, but he's gotten into the building, and he's just hanging out with the skeleton, and it doesn't matter. That's the very end of the episode. He's the one who actually has the Book of Resurrection, and so in the next episode, I would presume Zia is able to make some sort of contact with this guy.
So you don't actually see the monster in the first episode. It's all about this book.
We absolutely do see the monster. However, he's in a big cloak, and we only see him for the first 3 minutes. So in the first 5 minutes, we get this very snowy landscape. This captain and his crew are in the mountains, the snowy mountains, and they're treasure hunters. Have you ever seen those people who use the tennis rackets as their shoes for snow boots?
No.
Okay, well that's an old timey type thing, but they have the old type snow boots, and they're trudging through the snow. It's nighttime. They're in the forest, and this big guy with Zia comes in and drops Zia onto the snow and says, "Heal him," and that's the monster. And then the monster goes scurrying up into the woods. And these guys...
So the monster is bringing... This seems like it would be the end of the book, because I'm just going to spoil the end of the book. What happens is that the monster decides to commit suicide once he learns that Victor Frankenstein is dead. But here it seems like they're almost twisting that, where the monster is trying to get him help before he dies.
Yes, and it doesn't seem like Zia is going to die, because even though they're a military group or treasure hunters, they do seem to have some idea of how to heal this guy. They take him. He's very feverish. They start rubbing snow on him. They kind of do what you'd see in an ER episode where they rush him into a tent and then everybody sticks their hands on him and they're just rubbing him down with snow because they know that they have to just cool his temperature, despite the fact that it's negative whatever degrees outside. So that's the first few minutes. But then it's where Zia starts talking in his sleep, that we get the back flashes that continually happen, and we learn more about his life. And what I really like is that we, instead of with the Dr. Frankenstein, where he comes across a little insensitive to humanity, all he cares about is wanting to be the best, the smartest. Yep. He wants to, again, conquer nature. It's really easy to root for Zia, because his inherent desire is not just to bring something back to life. It's to help humanity. He has a respect for nature that the other version of Frankenstein in my head did not.
That is very different from the Benedict Cumberbatch Frankenstein.
Yeah, because I would assume that guy was pretty narcissistic.
Victor Frankenstein, yeah, he was just always trying to be the best. He didn't have a moral compass to him. Mm-hmm. So, okay.
That's more like Dr. Thackeray from The Nick. And I will compare the two shows because they do have a heavy emphasis on medicine, which was cool to see from a Turkish production, which I've never seen any Turkish production before. But in the first scene, again, we see him rushed into an ER type tent. They They also tackle cholera in this episode. They also tackle leprosy and gangrene, and then also the fever. But the cool thing about the cholera outbreak was you see earlier on, his mom takes a swig of water because they're at this like picnic type thing, and this one guy is just giving out water. Well, the water is tainted, and so that bacteria ends up getting all across the town. Everybody's getting sick, and cholera can kill you in less than a day. That is something I learned from this episode. And the way that people could try to get over it is they have to stay hydrated, which seems crazy, like it's defeating the purpose because they get it from ingesting something that is infected. But what happens is it dehydrates you so quickly because you're throwing up and getting sick and you can't keep things down.
So it's like a worse version of food poisoning.
Yes, it is, because it just like with the E. coli or any other bacteria that like ends up taking over your body, it'll kill you from the inside out. Mm-hmm. And so what the mom ends up doing, what his dad, Zia's dad, and him, they start like trying to take control of the town before they know the mom is sick by telling them to boil their water, which will de-infect it or at least kill off any germs that would be hanging out there. They actually know quite a lot for whenever this takes place. But they're saying you have to stay hydrated. Mm-hmm. Even so, most of the town is lost. Like everybody loses at least one loved one. There's a scene quite soon afterwards where you're seeing a graveyard where people aren't even allowed to bury them, but then they break across the mill anyway and they go in there.
This seems depressing.
It's very depressing, but at the same time, there's a love story going on where, again, he loves Asiya, and the mom's last words are like, you two should be together, and it's just all kind of pushing you towards seeing Zia's point of view, which is that he understands nature is a cycle where like things die, things rot, but then what comes out is new life. But with humans, once they die, they're dead forever. There's no new life coming from that.
Right.
And so he feels like it's his responsibility to move medicine forward. You know, he wants to expand it. He wants to look also at the stuff that's been kind of shoo-shooed by Western medicine. Like Eastern medicine. That's where he comes across the wanting to find the book of the resurrection or whatever, because he knows that there's like mystics and soothsayers who have long been kind of dismissed, but who at one time were highly respected as well. So he's saying, why can we not do this as well? And his dad is like, I'm the best doctor around, and he is. Like, yes. That's why I like that they don't make him hate his dad, but at the same time see his dad as like a dying art.
So as a quick question, putting Frankenstein aside, say you didn't know that this was a show based on that, and I saw the first 2 minutes where they say that in the titles as well, but it seems like you're just saying you like the first episode anyways, despite the fact that it doesn't seem like there's that much actual Frankenstein elements, at least from the book, going on.
I guess so. Again, I didn't read the book, so I'm not there trying to.
Well, what I'm saying is that like you
scene by scene, but the monster's not there. So if someone comes in there expecting to see a bloody, gory mess with a monster, that's not really Frankenstein, the book, and it's not really Frankenstein, this show. Mm-hmm. So that way you would be disappointed, sure. Like I said before, though, the creature, as they put it, because they don't know what that is. So they're not, he has to tell them within the first few minutes, he's like, that's a dead body that I resurrected. That's like the one coherent thought he has before he passes out.
So you know for sure that he's found the Book of Resurrection from the very beginning of the story.
Where we leave it in the backflashes, he is still at medical school. He hasn't even taken his first class. He's writing a letter to his love, to Asiya, and then he's also meeting this guy, this madman. But like in the future, he's definitely already obviously brought this guy back to life. Okay. And I don't know how many years have gone by since he still looks pretty young. But like I said before, he's only in his late 30s in the book, right?
Yes.
By the time that he perishes. So I don't know if they're going to have him perish here, but it seems like it's almost got an optimistic note to it, where I would be a little surprised in this miniseries if they just kill him off. I don't think it's it's a loose based adaptation. The treasure hunters, I don't know what they're looking for either. They may be looking for the book, they may be looking for something else in these snowy mountains. But what they find, you know what they might be looking for? They might be looking for the monster. Maybe they've been given because they are army people, so maybe they were sent out to kill
So they were looking for the monster. The monster showed
Nah,
up.
maybe I'm wrong.
Because if they saw the monster, I feel like they
They
would
were
just try and
debating
kill him.
whether or not it was a jinn, which means that they're Muslim because that's more of a spirit in that sense. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So like, what were the pros and cons? What do you think worked? What did not?
Well, like I said, it's easy to root for the main character, which is always nice. The decor, the art form. Like, I stayed through the credits because it was so short of an episode, and I found out some interesting things. For instance, stylistically, they had a huge art team, which showed because of the costuming and everything. But they also had a horse, dog, mouse, wolf, dog trainer. Like, all different separate trainers.
Yeah, you have to have trainers on set whenever you have any
But
type
for
of
a
animal.
wolf dog trainer, like what would your how do you become a wolf dog trainer? They also had a calligraphy consultant. They also had just a ton of like harp, orchestra, bassoon music in the background. No anachronistic pop music like in Dickinson. It reminded me the dreariness and the setting of it. Great Expectations when we did that. But that was set in 1812 and 1840. And the real, like, I don't know if I would call it con because I don't really have a con with the plot, but I do have an issue with the time period / setting. I cannot lock it down. And I tried so hard. I will show you how much I tried. So the book itself takes place in 1700s. I looked that up.
Yep.
All right. And I know that wherever this takes place, Turkey is still part of the Ottoman Empire. Okay? Because they're still using Ottoman
Yes,
banknotes.
absolutely. No, absolutely. Yeah.
So I'm thinking like we're in the 19th century, probably late 19th century, but then there are reasons to believe that that's not the case. It could be earlier because you have these zoetropes, you know what those are? Or dedalums. They're the slots with images that spin really fast and then you can see like moving images.
They show that in the teaser trailer for this show.
Those have existed since 1833. That was an 1833 invention. And he's playing with that as a kid. And then rail transport in Turkey only began to start, and we see him going by train into Istanbul in 1856. And then the song that they use, Serenade for Strings in E major, existed in 1885. Now, I'm not sure if they could have obviously used a different song for the time period.
So what's your best guess?
Well, no, I'm not even close yet.
You're not even done yet, okay.
Not even close. So cholera outbreaks, they took all over the 19th century. So that could be anywhere in the 1800s. But carriages themselves were phased out probably towards the turn of the century. I mean, cars became a big deal in the early 1900s.
Yes.
And then you had the 19th century electric light. So he's in Istanbul for his education. And I looked it up, and the only time that they started getting street lamps that were electric, 1914.
Wait,
That completely throws
yeah,
it off.
because you've been saying this whole time 19th century, so that just leads you to believe sometime in the 1800s.
The only way they could possibly have had street lamps is if it was in the 1900s. However, I think what happened is that they were like, well, he's going to have to use electricity to resuscitate this monster, right? Let's try to play into that. So maybe that's just an offshoot, right? But then the Imperial School of Medicine, which he attends, that school merged in 1909 to become just a different type of medical school. It had a different name, so it couldn't possibly be past 1909. But then they call it Istanbul. Istanbul wasn't called Istanbul at the time. It was Constantinople, obviously.
So
that started in 1930, though. That's when that name changed.
Wait, so you're saying that's 1930 now? So
I'm saying that they must have informally been calling it Istanbul at the time for 50 some years, because it really does seem like the show wants to say that it was in the late 19th century. But there are just the Istanbul fact and the electric lights make it impossible that it couldn't be after the 1900s. But they're all wearing fezzes. Do you know what fezzes are?
Yeah,
Those tiny little hats with the string. Yeah. Did you know that they're actually illegal in Turkey? They became illegal in 1925. 5 years before it was called Istanbul. Everybody's wearing them in the show. So it couldn't possibly be before 1925. My point is, there's been a mistake. Someone didn't stay accurate. The main two things are the fact that they continually call it Istanbul, and then also the street lamps are around there. I think if they get rid of those two things, they would be fairly set in the 1880s or something.
Even though they had all those people working on the show with all the trainers and everything, they weren't able to get the time period.
Or maybe they just assumed like no one would really look into it and the people would suspend their disbelief, which they should, because other than that, the show's pretty good. You will get that ooh factor when you're thinking about how close he was with who's sort of his sister at this point, because they met each other when they were like 7 years old, and then they were raised in the same house, and then they became lovers. Like that just
was wondering
I mean,
how
this
that
is
was
back in
going
the
to be.
1800s.
Well, I was wondering how that was going to be, because in the teaser trailer it shows them kissing, and then it shows, I think, what you're talking about, the was it Zoe tropes or Zoe's machines?
Zoe tropes.
Yeah, Zoe tropes.
He actually makes one at one point.
Yeah, well, and I think that in the teaser one is the one that they show which one he makes, and he's right next to her the whole time. So I was wondering how they were going to explore that romance angle, because you need it in a show that's talking about Frankenstein.
It's also nice that they don't have the Scrooge thing where he screws up that love interest early on and we're watching their breakup. Really, when he goes for his education, they're still tight. Like, he's still going to write her. It seems like their relationship is stable. So they're subverting your expectations there, and they're subverting your expectations where he doesn't hate his parents. There's no like huge squabble between the two of them, and it just makes it seem like you can have a main character that doesn't have as many issues, but clearly is still like going down the wrong path. Because like he shouldn't want the book of resuscitation. Like, it's not going to do him any favors. It's obviously going to lead to trouble, but like he's still going to go for it anyways.
So what would you give the show out of 10?
I'm giving it a 7.5 out of 10. If I had more time to watch it, I would watch the rest of the other 7 episodes, but I don't, so I can't.
Netflix has continually been testing Turkish series the past few years, and this is exactly what they're doing here, because you've had The Tailor, then Shamaran, and The Club. Those are 3 Turkish series that have done really well on Netflix, and so and that's the reason why they decided to make
very
this
well
show.
in their own countries.
I
or
think
very
just
well
in terms
European.
I think in terms of viewership wise, just kind of across the board.
I don't know in the U.S. that many people who have recommended it.
Well, I say this because they did shoot in Istanbul, and did you know that it was actually the second largest city in the country in which they shot? But Istanbul over the years has had so many structural changes that it's become a global media capital. In fact, this joins the likes of a lot of different movies: Murder on the Orient Express, 1974 and 2017, The Equalizer 2, The Night Manager, Skyfall, The World Is Not Enough, Tyrant, Downsizing, Argo. Those were all shot in Istanbul, and it seems like, I know that you were saying that Netflix was trying to go into Africa when we did the Brave ones, when they were trying to shoot
Nigeria?
there, but it just seems like they're trying to go global at this point, because again, it seems like they're really trying to push Turkish TV.
I don't know with Erdogan and his government whether or not that's going to continue, or if it has continued over the last year or so, but I mean, let's hope. Yeah, I guess.
And this show has gotten mixed reviews, or it seems like wherever you go for reviews, it seems to vary, because it has a 6.9 on IMDb. It doesn't have a tomato meter yet, but Decider said skip it, and then the Midgard Times said everything is
Why'd
overblown.
they say skip it, though?
They said that it was overwrought and disjointed. And I'm a little surprised to hear you say that you like the pacing for the show, because even places that have liked it, such as like Common Sense Media, which gave it 3 out of 5 stars, said that the pacing is kind of slow for all the episodes. Yeah.
Again, the first episode's 35 minutes, so how much can you really complain about? If they had tried to put in his full backstory in like 70 minutes, I probably would have gotten a little bored. But that's why I thought the second episode was going to concentrate, and then he'd wake up by like the 3rd episode, and then we'd see like a monster type thing. So it might get worse if they just try to linger on his backflashes for too long.
But the main character, Zia, he's actually a rising star in Turkey, it seems like, because he was in the Turkish adaptation of the OC, the Fox show, back in like 2001, and then he got critical acclaim for his role, I think in 2018, for a show called A Miracle, and then also he was in a different Netflix series called The Protector, which was another Turkish series. So it does just seem like that's the main reason why this show was made. They're trying to really push Turkish TV on Netflix.
I mean, I think they could have done it way worse had they, because there's not a lot of other Frankenstein based stories right now, right?
No, I agree with you, because the Frankenstein story and characters has taken a shift recently, I feel like, in at least Western media, for a younger audience. If you think about it, you had movies like Frankenweenie, Monster High, Hotel Transylvania, Igor, even the ABC series Once Upon a Time had Victor Frankenstein as one of the characters. So it seems like they're actually trying to take it back to its original roots.
Okay. Frankenstein or Frankenstein's monster. It was funny because I read in 1899 they had already started to confuse or conflate the two. Like the line had become blurred.
Yes.
So that happened very early on in the story.
People who haven't read the books always think that Frankenstein is the monster.
They also think that the original title to the book is only called Frankenstein when it's like Frankenstein or the something of Prometheus or something like that. Yeah. Oh, I also read that Mary Shelley, her mom passed away in childbirth. And the two main characters, when you have Asiya and Zia, their moms passed away fairly early in both their lives.
Yes.
So it seemed like maybe that was also drawing inspiration or homage to that storyline. And maybe that's part of the reason why. Like, obviously, if he could perfect his resurrection, I would assume he would want to do that for everybody. And then we would have had world overpopulation a long time ago.
With Izan, did you meet a character named
Izan? I think is the monster, but I'm not sure.
Well, it's played by a dual role. He's the monster. He's also Zia's mentor in the show, and it's played by
maybe he's the crazy guy. Maybe he's the mad lad,
the guy who was
the strange, quirky guy. Yeah.
Okay, well that's
sorry. Last thing before we'll end it. So the strange, quirky guy, he opens the Book of the Dead. I want to say that the Book of Resurrection at the very end.
Yes.
And then he like signals to his dog, and his dog he's named Darwin, like as in Darwin.
Yeah, obviously.
But then at the very end in the credits, it says Ginger as Darwin. So the name of the
dog was
Ginger.
All right.
Thanks for listening. We'll see you on the next episode. Hope you enjoyed this one. Bye.
Bye.